Subscribe to Dr. Nightmare Channel now.
Story 1. The Man with the Stroller. Halloween night was always something magical to me as a child. The kind of evening where the air seemed colder, sharper, and somehow charged with a strange sort of electricity, as if the world itself was holding its breath while shadows stretched long and the flicker of carved pumpkins threw jagged grins across porches. And I remember that year with more clarity than I would like, because it was the night when the magic of Halloween twisted into something that still crawls in the back of my mind every time the leaves begin to fall and the nights grow longer. I was only 8 years old, small enough to still believe in the innocent thrill of costumes and candy, yet old enough to notice when something felt wrong. And that particular Halloween, my mother had dropped me off at my friend Ethan's house, where he and another boy from the neighborhood, Marcus, were waiting with wide smiles and empty pillowcases ready to be filled to bursting with sweets. Ethan's mother wasn't home, though my mom didn't know that when she kissed my forehead, reminded me to behave, and told me she would pick me up later in the night. And I remember watching the taillights of her car vanish down the street, not realizing that the absence of any adult supervision would shape the course of the night into something I still wish I could erase from memory. Ethan was a year older than me, Marcus a year older still, and there was something about their confidence, their careless laughter, that made me feel both safe and vulnerable at the same time, because while I wanted to trust their sense of adventure, I also felt the nagging weight of knowing my mother would never have approved of 3 boys wandering alone after dark, their only guardians being the masks they wore and the naive lies they told to suspicious neighbors about parents waiting just a block ahead. We had already collected a good haul by the time the sun slipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges that quickly faded to black. And after a short break of greasy pizza and sodas in Ethan's messy living room, we decided to venture back out, pillowcases swinging heavily at our sides, the night colder now, the wind whispering dry leaves across cracked sidewalks. By 8 o'clock, the streets had thinned, the clusters of laughing children had dwindled, and most porch lights had flickered off, leaving stretches of darkened houses that seemed almost abandoned. And it was in one of those quiet blocks, where the houses stood farther apart and the only sound was the crunch of our sneakers against gravel, that we noticed him. Just a shadow at first, a figure moving slowly behind us, pushing a stroller that squeaked faintly with each turn of its wheels. We told ourselves it was just a father, maybe a late-night trick-or-treater with his baby asleep inside. But there was something off about the way he moved, too slow at first, then gradually faster, as if matching our pace, and when he hummed a lullaby under his breath, a soft and broken tune that drifted toward us in the dark, I felt the first shiver crawl across my skin. He called out in a friendly enough tone when he caught up with us, asking us how the night's haul had been, telling us it was late and that he was heading back home, that he hadn't given out much candy and would happily let us have the rest. And Ethan's eyes lit up like we had just struck gold. The man pointed to the stroller where a plastic bag hung, bulging with brightly wrapped sweets, and said his daughter was asleep under the folding cover, that he didn't want to wake her, but if we followed him just a few houses down, he'd hand over more candy than we could carry. Marcus grinned at the thought, Ethan nodded eagerly, and though my stomach clenched with unease, I trailed behind them as the man began pushing the stroller a little faster, his humming louder now, the wheels squealing against the sidewalk like a warning I didn't yet understand. The streets were dead quiet, every porch dark, every curtain drawn, and it felt wrong, like we were being led away from the safety of lit streets into some silent trap. Yet none of us spoke, except for Ethan, who answered the man's casual questions about our school, our favorite candies, our costumes, while I stared at the stroller, wondering why I hadn't heard even the faintest sound from the supposed baby hidden inside. When he reached his house, a squat, unwelcoming shape with a single porch light that flickered weakly above the door, he unlocked it with surprising speed and pushed the stroller inside first before turning back to us with a smile that looked wrong on his face, stretched too wide, too eager, as he told us to come in and wait by the door while he grabbed the rest of the candy. Ethan stepped in first, Marcus right behind him, and though every nerve in my body screamed to run, I followed, because what else could I do but stay with my friends, even as the smell of the house hit me, stale, damp, and faintly metallic, like rust or old blood, and the shadows inside seemed too heavy, swallowing the weak light from the street. Inside, the air felt heavy, almost humid, and I remember the way my throat tightened as if the atmosphere itself wanted to keep me from speaking. Yet Ethan, always trying to seem brave, called out to the man with a nervous chuckle, asking what kind of candy he had, his voice trembling slightly, though he would never admit it later. And the man just smiled again, that same stretched, unnatural smile, before disappearing down a shadowy hallway with the stroller, his footsteps slow, deliberate, echoing faintly off the bare walls, as though the house were emptier than it should have been. We stood there awkwardly, the three of us, clutching our pillowcases full of candy, the silence pressing in until it became unbearable. And that was when Ethan, curiosity always his downfall, whispered that he wanted to see the baby, that he thought it was weird we hadn't heard it stir once. Not a cough, not a cry, nothing. So he crept forward toward the living room where the man had left the stroller, and I remember wanting to grab his arm and beg him not to, but I didn't. I just watched him as he reached out and slowly lifted the folding canopy. The moment his face changed, when all the color drained from it and his mouth opened in a sharp inhale that he quickly stifled, was the coldest chill of my young life coursed through me. And Ethan turned back to us, eyes wide, whispering harshly that we needed to go, now, right now. His urgency so raw and real that Marcus and I didn't question him. We just turned and bolted for the door, our heavy pillowcases thumping against our sides, slowing us down, but not enough to stop us from crashing back out into the night air, our lungs burning as we ran, our shoes scraping the cracked pavement in frantic rhythm. Behind us, I thought I heard the man call out, his voice no longer friendly but sharp, commanding. And maybe I imagined the sound of the stroller wheels squeaking after us, though to this day I'm not sure if that was real or just my terrified mind stitching horrors together. But what I know is real is that a woman's voice suddenly cut through the night, calling for us to stop, and we froze halfway down the block, turning to see a neighbor standing on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, her expression worried as she hurried towards us, asking if we knew that man, if we had gone inside his house. Ethan blurted everything out in a rush, his words stumbling over each other as he said the man had lured us with candy, that there wasn't a baby in the stroller at all. And I remember the way the woman's face twisted with fear and anger, not at us, but at the realization of what had nearly happened, because she told us in a hushed, urgent voice that the man didn't have a daughter, that he didn't have any children at all, and that she had seen him before, wandering the streets at night with that same stroller, always empty, always covered, as if he were playing some sinister game no one else had caught on to yet. She ushered us into her car, despite the irony of climbing into yet another stranger's vehicle, though in that moment, the warmth of the upholstery and the locked doors felt like the safest place in the world. And she drove us each home one by one, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could see the whites of her knuckles in the glow of the passing streetlights. And when she dropped me off, she walked me to the door and spoke with my mother, her voice low and urgent, while I stood silently in the hallway, pillowcase slipping from my fingers as the weight of the night pressed down on me, my mind racing with images of what Ethan might have seen when he lifted that stroller's cover, though he refused to say more, only repeating over and over that we had to leave, that we couldn't stay in that house another second. Later, when my parents called the police,
I lay in my room staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house sounding like footsteps, every shadow outside my window stretching into the form of a man pushing an empty stroller, and I felt for the first time in my life what it meant to truly fear another human being, not because of what they had done, but because of what they had almost done. And the not knowing what was under that cover, what the man wanted with us, why he prowled Halloween night with a stroller that concealed nothing a child should ever see, was somehow worse than any answer could have been.
That night did not end when the door closed behind me, and my mother's worried whispers blended with the low voice of the neighbor who had driven me home. Because even after my parents sent me upstairs and told me to try to sleep, my body refused to rest. Every muscle still braced with that animal tension you feel when you know danger is near. And I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there, imagining the squeak of stroller wheels in the hallway, imagining the low hum of a lullaby seeping through the walls, the kind of humming that had followed us down the street and wormed its way into my bones. The police came, or at least that's what I was told the next morning, though I wasn't allowed to hear the details, only overhearing fragments of conversation as my parents sat at the kitchen table, my father's voice low and serious, my mother's voice sharp and trembling, words like empty house, dangerous man, and lured children filtering through to me as I hovered at the top of the stairs, my small hands gripping the banister as if holding on to something solid would keep me from being pulled back into that nightmare. What I never heard, not from the police, not from my parents, was what they found in that house, if anything at all. And the silence around those details became its own kind of horror, because silence lets the imagination run wild, and children's imaginations are cruel things when sharpened by fear. Ethan would not speak of it. Not at school, not when I cornered him in the hallway weeks later and begged him to tell me what he saw under the stroller's cover, his face paling as he shook his head, muttering that I didn't want to know, that he wished he didn't know, and the way his eyes darted around as if the man might be standing just behind him told me enough, that whatever he saw was not a sleeping baby, not a doll, not some harmless trick, but something so wrong that even a boy who had once boasted about sneaking into abandoned houses and taunting older kids on the block was now too shaken to find words. Marcus, older and more cynical, swore Ethan was just messing with us, that it was probably some grotesque Halloween prop, maybe a mask or a bundle of meat to scare us. But the tremor in Ethan's voice and the weight in his silence said otherwise, and it left me in a limbo of half-truths and unanswered questions that gnawed at me far worse than any certainty ever could. Halloween came and went the next year, and though my mother insisted on walking me door to door, keeping me in her sight the entire night, the thrill was gone, the excitement soured by the memory of flickering porch lights and quiet streets where predators might hide in plain sight, dressed as parents, dressed as neighbors, dressed as anything they chose. Because costumes don't just belong to children, and the world had revealed to me too soon that monsters wear masks too. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of that man, his face blurred, his smile stretching too wide, always pushing that stroller down endless streets that twist back on themselves, the squeak of its wheels growing louder until it drowns out everything. And I wake with my heart racing, certain for a moment that if I glance toward the foot of my bed, I'll see him standing there, rocking the empty carriage, waiting for me to look inside. There are moments, rare but sharp, when I think I almost understand what Ethan saw. Glimpses in dreams of something pale and still, something that should have been alive but wasn't, or worse, something that was alive but wrong. Its limbs too long, its skin too slack, its eyes not closed in sleep, but staring, unblinking, at the canopy that covered it. And though I can't be sure if those are memories or just terrors my mind stitched together from fragments of his silence, they're enough to make me shudder every time I hear the squeal of a cart in a grocery aisle, enough to keep me from ever trusting a stranger's smile, especially on Halloween night when shadows seem longer, when doors open too easily, and when the line between trick and threat blurs in the darkness. I've told myself for years that what saved us wasn't our own caution or cleverness, but the chance arrival of that neighbor stepping outside at just the right moment. And sometimes I wonder what might have happened if she hadn't, if we had lingered even a minute longer in that damp, hollow house, waiting for the man to return from the shadows with his promised candy, what he would have done, what he had planned for us, and if the stroller was not bait, but a vessel, something meant to carry away not sweets, not a baby, but something far more terrible, us. The police came back to our street the following week, though I only knew because I saw their cruiser parked outside Ethan's house one afternoon when my mother drove me home from school, and she tightened her grip on the steering wheel as if she were afraid even glancing at them might somehow pull us back into that nightmare. She told me to stay out of it, that it wasn't my concern anymore. But in small towns, children overhear everything, whether from hushed conversations at dinner tables, muttered gossip exchanged between neighbors in grocery aisles, or the whispered exaggerations that spread like wildfire in the school cafeteria. From what I gathered, the house where the man had led us wasn't even his. It had been abandoned for years after the last family moved out, its utilities shut off, its windows collecting dust, its front porch sagging from neglect, yet somehow he had a key, or at least the ability, to slip inside. Some people swore he was a squatter, others said he was something worse, a drifter who moved from neighborhood to neighborhood, always appearing on Halloween with that stroller, always vanishing before anyone could catch him. The police questioned Ethan and Marcus, though not me. My parents refused. But I remember Marcus later telling kids in the schoolyard that the cops hadn't found any baby, no dolls, no props, nothing in the stroller at all, as if Ethan had imagined the whole thing. Ethan, pale and shaking, denied nothing but refused to confirm anything either, only saying quietly they didn't look in the right place. A statement that haunted me more than anything because it suggested he had seen something the rest of us never would, something hidden, something that left him hollow. Weeks passed, then months, and though the town tried to bury the story under layers of denial and distraction, Halloween never felt the same again. Parents stopped letting their children go out unsupervised, porch lights turned off earlier, and whispers lingered of a man who hunted the night in disguise, using the one holiday when no one questions masks, when no one questions strangers, to walk unnoticed among families until he found the ones vulnerable enough to follow him. Every year after, when October rolled around and decorations sprouted in yards, when the smell of burning leaves filled the air and candy displays took over store shelves, I felt the weight of that stroller behind me again, the creak of its wheels, the hush of his humming, and I would catch myself glancing over my shoulder even in broad daylight. As for Ethan, our friendship withered slowly, not out of anger, but out of something heavier. His eyes changed after that night, always darting, always tired, as though he had seen something not just wrong but impossible, something that kept him awake long after he should have been able to forget. We remained cordial, sharing nods in the hallways, but the easy laughter of our childhood never returned. When people asked years later why we had drifted apart, I could never explain in a way that didn't sound ridiculous, because how do you tell someone that silence itself can split friendships, that unspoken horrors weigh heavier than words? I never learned what became of the man. The police never announced an arrest, never released a name, and if they ever knew who he was, they never told us. Sometimes I wonder if he was even real in the way we think of real, or if he was something older, something that wears the skin of a man, pushing an empty carriage through the streets year after year,
waiting for curious children to follow, luring them with promises of candy, of safety, of sweetness, before revealing what hides beneath the cover. Now, whenever Halloween night rolls around, when I see children skipping from house to house under the watchful eyes of parents, I feel both relief and sorrow. Relief that perhaps they are safer now. Sorrow that innocence has to be guarded so fiercely. Because I know, deep in my bones, that they're out there somewhere. The stroller still rolls, the wheels still squeak, and the man still hums his lullaby in the dark, waiting for the one moment when a child lingers too far from the safety of home, when curiosity outweighs fear, and when the canopy is lifted once more to reveal whatever it was Ethan saw that night. Something so awful that it stole the light from his eyes and left me, even decades later, wondering if monsters don't live under our beds at all, but walk among us in plain sight, pushing strollers down quiet streets, smiling too wide, humming too softly, waiting for the next door to open.
Story 2. The Clown at the Window. Halloween has always been one of those nights where the air feels different, colder, and heavier, as though the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to slip through the cracks of normal life. And the year it happened to me, I was a college sophomore with nothing better to do than sit at home, hand out candy to the occasional trick-or-treater, and try to convince myself that the night would pass like any other. Though even then, there was an unease in my stomach I couldn't quite explain. My parents had gone out earlier that afternoon, not to any party or event, but simply to spend the evening with some family friends across town, leaving me in charge of our house at the end of a cul-de-sac, a place that always felt a little isolated on nights when the street was quiet and the porch lights of our neighbors began to go dark one by one. I didn't mind at first, because my mother had stocked up on so much candy it looked like she was preparing for a siege, and I figured I'd spend the evening answering the doorbell, tossing sweets into bags, and then retreating upstairs to catch up on a show or two before heading to bed early. By the time the first wave of kids showed up, groups of pirates, princesses, superheroes, and tiny vampires, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of purple and orange, and the crisp air smelled faintly of burning leaves from someone's fireplace down the street. I greeted them with the exaggerated enthusiasm of someone who hadn't had a reason to smile all week, scooping candy into their buckets and pillowcases as their parents waited on the sidewalk, smiling politely at me before shepherding their children to the next house. That went on for hours until the steady stream of trick-or-treaters dwindled to nothing, the porch light casting a lonely glow on our driveway, the candy bowl still half full despite my generous handfuls. I remember checking the time around 9 o'clock and thinking it was just about over, that I could switch off the lights, crawl into bed, and let the rest of the night pass in silence. But just as I stood in the hallway, deciding whether to blow out the pumpkin candles, the doorbell rang again, the chime echoing too loud in the empty house, and my dog, an excitable little terrier named Milo, launched into a frenzy of barking that only added to the sudden surge of unease prickling at the back of my neck. I walked to the front door, candy bowl still in hand, and peered through the glass of the storm door. What I saw standing there made me freeze where I was. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his entire body cloaked in a cheap but unsettling clown costume, the kind with oversized polka dots and ruffled cuffs. But what froze me in place was the mask, white face, exaggerated red smile stretching too far across the cheeks, and eyes painted into black hollows that gave no hint of what hid beneath. He stood perfectly still on my porch, a brown sack dangling limply from one gloved hand, and when he noticed me staring at him through the glass, he slowly raised his other hand and waved.
At first, I told myself it had to be some teenager dragging the night out too long, maybe trying to spook people for a laugh. But there was nothing playful about the way he moved, no drunken swagger or childish energy. He was deliberate, slow, almost patient, and when he pointed at the sack in his hand, tilting his head like he expected me to understand, my stomach twisted. I mouthed the words through the glass, "Sorry, no more candy," and pulled the inner door shut, locking it with trembling fingers before backing away. Milo barked even louder, throwing his small body against the bottom of the door as though he could drive the intruder away. But the sound only made me more aware of how silent the clown himself had been. No words, no laughter, just that slow, deliberate wave and the tilt of his head. I tried to convince myself he would leave, that he'd realize the porch light meant nothing and move on. But before I could calm down, the doorbell rang again, long and sharp, followed by the sound of the storm door rattling as though someone was trying the handle. I ran upstairs, scooping Milo into my arms, his tiny heart beating so fast I could feel it through his ribs, and locked myself in my bedroom. I shut off the lights, pulled the curtains closed, and sat on the edge of my bed listening to every creak of the house, every faint scrape of tree branches against the windows. Minutes crawled by. Then, just when I started to believe he'd gone, I heard it. A loud crack, followed by the unmistakable sound of the storm door snapping open. My breath caught in my throat. He hadn't gone anywhere. He was inside the porch now, one thin barrier away from stepping into the house itself. I clutched my phone, dialing my brother first, desperate for someone to answer, but when he picked up, I could hear muffled laughter and music in the background. He told me it was probably just some prank, to ignore it, and brushed me off before hanging up. My father didn't answer at all. My mother's phone went straight to voicemail. I sat there, heart pounding, Milo growling low in his throat, and tried to focus on the sound of my own breathing to drown out the silence. For a few blessed minutes, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the doorbell rang again, so loud it felt like it shook the house, followed by the soft, deliberate tapping of knuckles against the wood, slow and rhythmic, like a lullaby played out in sound. I don't know when I drifted into uneasy half-sleep, exhaustion finally weighing me down, but I woke with a jolt when Milo let out a low, sharp growl and crawled to the edge of the bed. His small body was rigid, ears perked toward the window, and when I turned to see what he was staring at, my blood turned to ice. The clown was there, right outside my second-floor window, his grotesque mask pressed against the glass, breath fogging a circle around the painted grin, his head tilting slowly as if studying me like a specimen. My room was on the upper floor. No one should have been able to reach that window. But when my eyes dropped, I saw the outline of my father's ladder propped against the siding, its rungs glinting faintly in the moonlight. I screamed before I even realized it, stumbling back so fast I knocked over the lamp on my nightstand, Milo barking like mad, the clown unmoving, just watching. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911, my voice breaking as I begged the operator to send someone immediately, telling her over and over that there was a man in a clown mask outside my window, that he had broken onto our porch, that he had climbed the ladder, that I didn't know what he wanted, but he wouldn't leave. The operator's calm voice was the only tether keeping me from collapsing, telling me help was on the way, telling me to stay where I was, to lock the door and remain quiet, and I obeyed, retreating to my parents' bedroom, barricading myself behind the heavy oak door as Milo pressed against my legs. I don't know how long it took the police to arrive, but every second stretched into eternity. Every faint creak of the house made me certain he had forced his way inside. Every shadow beneath the door made me believe I would see his shoes there any moment, waiting for the knob to turn. But when the knock finally came, it was the booming voice of the police calling out, and only then did I feel the suffocating grip of fear loosen enough to move. They searched the property, found the ladder still leaning against the wall, the storm door latch broken clean off, and muddy footprints smeared across the porch and up the rungs of the ladder, but no man, no clown, no sign of where he had gone after watching me through the window. They told me to stay elsewhere that night, that it wasn't safe to remain alone, so I packed a bag in shaking hands and left with Milo to spend the night at my friend Adam's house, though even there I barely slept, my mind replaying the image of that mask over and over, the way it pressed against the glass, the way it tilted its head, the silence more terrifying than any laughter could have been. For weeks afterwards, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every time I passed a store display with clown masks, my stomach twisted. Every time I heard the scrape of branches against my window, I jolted awake, convinced he had returned. The police never caught anyone, never found a trace beyond the broken latch and the ladder. And my parents tried to convince me it was just some sick Halloween prank, that it meant nothing more. But deep down I knew it was not a prank. It was deliberate. He wanted me to see him. He wanted me to know he could reach me anywhere, even in the safety of my own room. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Milo has grown too old to bark at shadows, I still hear it. The faint tapping at the window, slow and patient, like knuckles rapping against wood, waiting for me to look, waiting for me to remember that smile pressed against the glass, and to know that some nightmares never.
Story 3. The Halloween Party Trap. Halloween has always been one of those nights that brings out the best and worst in people. The energy in the air buzzing with costumes and chaos, with streets alive in ways that feel different from any other night of the year. And back when I was in college, my friends and I looked forward to it as the highlight of the fall, a chance to forget about exams and assignments and responsibilities, and to lose ourselves in laughter, music, and parties that seemed to spill out into the streets like wildfire. That year, though, was different. We hadn't planned properly, hadn't bought tickets to the big events on campus or reserved spots at the bars that charged too much for watered-down drinks. And by the time the last weekend of October rolled around, everything seemed sold out, every door closed to us. We were restless. 4 of us girls sitting in my friend Kate's living room, costumes half finished, drinks already in our hands, scrolling through our phones in frustration. Each of us silently unwilling to admit that maybe this year we would have to accept defeat and spend Halloween watching horror movies in pajamas instead of dancing beneath strobe lights and cheap decorations. But Kate, bold as always, refused to let the night die so easily. She posted on her story a shameless plea for any party within reach. And though I cringed at the thought of begging strangers for invitations, I can't deny the surge of excitement that ran through us when her phone buzzed almost immediately with a message from someone none of us knew too well but recognized enough not to dismiss. He said he knew of a house party happening just one town over, gave an address, a start time, and a short list of rules. Bring your own drinks, respect the house, and make sure the ratio of girls to guys was even. It sounded almost too good to be true, but with our options dwindling and our spirits already lifted by the thought of adventure, we decided to go. The house, according to the address, was only a 15-minute drive away, and so we finished our makeup with shaking hands, zipped up costumes that suddenly felt perfect for the night, and called an Uber to take us there. The car ride was filled with the kind of wild laughter that comes from equal parts nerves and excitement, and by the time we turned onto the street where the house stood, a large 2-story with cars lining both sides of the curb, we were already certain this night would be one we'd talk about for years. From the outside, the house looked almost too quiet. The lights dimmed, the windows glowing faintly with orange light. But as we approached, we heard the thumping bass of music echoing faintly from within. We didn't knock. We simply opened the door and stepped inside, and immediately the air shifted, warm, humid, thick with the smell of sweat and alcohol, yet strangely hollow too, like the space wasn't truly lived in. Orange string lights hung haphazardly across bare walls, casting a flickering glow on a crowd of people who all seemed a little older than us, their faces hidden behind masks or half-done makeup, and their eyes glassy and movements too slow, too detached from the music that rattled the floorboards. At first, none of us cared. We were too swept up in the thrill of it, too relieved to have found somewhere to spend the night. And when a man in his 50s approached us, smiling too wide as he introduced himself as John, the father of the supposed host Luke, we brushed aside the unease and followed him into the kitchen where coolers full of ice and cans waited. He was overly friendly, his eyes lingering too long on us, his laughter a little too loud, and though I felt a flicker of discomfort, Kate dismissed it with a wave, whispering that he was harmless, just a dad excited to have young people in his home. But the house didn't feel like a home. The walls were bare, the floors scuffed, the furniture almost non-existent, and the longer I stayed, the more I realized that apart from the coolers and folding tables set up for beer pong, there was nothing to suggest anyone actually lived there. I tried to ignore it, drowning the thought in sips of cheap vodka mixed with flat soda, but the unease only grew as John circled the rooms, always watching us, always offering more drinks. It was when he handed me a cup filled with something I hadn't asked for, insisting with that too wide smile that it was just right for me, that I felt the first sharp sting of fear. The liquid burned my throat in a way that felt different from alcohol, a chemical bitterness that lingered long after I swallowed. And within minutes, my head grew heavy, my vision blurring at the edges. My friends laughed it off, claiming I couldn't handle my liquor, but the way their own words began to slur, their eyes glassy and unfocused, told me they felt it too, though none of them wanted to admit it. I stumbled through the crowd, desperate to find the supposed host, this mysterious Luke, but every person I asked only shook their heads, some insisting they hadn't seen him, others ignoring me entirely. The music pounded, the lights flickered, and the walls seemed to press closer, the air thick with the smell of sweat and something sour I couldn't name. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was blank, the battery drained despite having been full when I arrived. It was then that I realized the truth. This wasn't a party, it was a trap. My friends, drunk or drugged or both, clung to each other, their laughter turning hollow, and John appeared again, his smile now stretched into something grotesque as he asked if we were having fun, his voice slick and mocking beneath the thrum of the music. I tried to push past him to find the door, but the crowd seemed to close in, faces blank, eyes lifeless, movement slow and unnatural, as if the entire house were filled with puppets waiting for strings to be pulled. Somehow, I made it outside, dragging Kate with me as she mumbled incoherently, her costume torn, her phone missing, and as we reached the street, flashing lights cut through the night, police cars pulling up, sirens wailing, neighbors spilling out of their houses to complain about the noise. The crowd scattered instantly, people fleeing into the night, leaving behind nothing but overturned cups and the sickly sweet smell of spilled alcohol. The police entered the house, but when they came back out, they told us what I had already begun to suspect. The house was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, no sign that anyone had lived there in years. It had been abandoned, a hollow shell dressed up for one night of horror. And whoever John really was, he was gone, leaving behind only unanswered questions and the gnawing certainty that we had been moments away from something far worse than a ruined party. I still don't know what his plan was, or what would have happened if we had stayed longer, if the police hadn't arrived when they did. I don't know how he got my number, or why he texted me later that night with words that made my skin crawl. Messages from an untraceable number asking where my favorite girl had gone, promising that he'd see me again soon. And though I blocked the number, though I changed my phone, though I moved on with my life, Every Halloween, I still feel the weight of his eyes in the dark, still hear the echo of that music in an empty house, still wonder how many other parties he has thrown in other abandoned homes, waiting for more girls to stumble in, too eager for a night of fun to notice the trap until it's too late. Because monsters don't just haunt forests or graveyards or dark basements. They hide in plain sight, behind masks and smiles, throwing parties that are never meant to end in laughter, only silence. And somewhere out there, John is still waiting, setting up coolers and stringing lights in another hollow house, ready for the next Halloween, the next sets of girls who think they found the perfect party, the next victims who won't be as lucky as we were to escape.